Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. And in this particular episode, I'm going to talk about don't be shy. You know, when you're trying to be in a relationship with someone, you have to put yourself out there. You got to be vulnerable. And being that, when I'm talking about shy, I'm talking about somebody that just kind of wants to stand there on the wall and want people to notice you and come to you and draw you out. Well, that isn't necessarily going to create the opportunities to connect with people. You have to be willing to put yourself out there. You have to show that kind of vulnerability, not just the vulnerability that I'm standing over here and I want you to notice me, so come pull me on the dance floor, but the kind of vulnerability that says, I'm going to take a chance, I'm going to open up, and I'm going to want to have conversations with you. So that requires you to have some confidence. So you got to feel good about yourself because you have to want to do this. And when you want to do this, then it seems like you're intentional. Then when the people who you are having a conversation with, they take it that you want to be in conversation with them. It's sort of a mutual appreciation thing without having to say it. Okay. And, you know, one of the other things is you want to know yourself because you can explain yourself. People are going to ask you questions, and having answers helps to forward the conversation. If you don't have answers to questions, if you just sound like you're saying no, when you don't have an answer, it almost sounds like you're saying no. It stops the conversation, and it sort of puts the onus on the other person to sort of dig up things to make this conversation, to sort of artificially make this conversation move along. And that can be a bit boring. Now, you do have people out there that just love to run their mouth and talk about themselves all the time, but that's not the kind of thing that's necessarily going to make a good connection, because you want there to be some crosstalk. You want there to be conversation between the two of you. So a question gets asked, then it gets answered, which follows with the next question. And, you know, that's how you build a relationship. That's how you build on that information sharing. That makes it fun. That makes it inclusive. So you want to know about yourself because you're going to want to know your likes and dislikes. Because if you're in a conversation with this person and you're hearing things that say maybe they don't quite gel with you, your philosophy or something, see, there's a perfect opportunity there to follow up with some questions to see if this is going to go the right direction or if it's just something that you're going to, decide to pass on. You see? So you want to know that. That way you don't spend your time working on something that, say philosophically you're just in a different place or that you've grown past. And it's like that expression, the first impressions are very important. And I think conversationally speaking, it's really good that you put your best foot forward. It's that when you know yourself, you have confidence. It seems like you want to be in this conversation. It sort of shows that you are available because you want to be available. You want to show that, because if you're not available, then that other person is just going to say, well, this is a waste of my time. This is just a bunch of small talk and I'm not interested in that. because the idea is that you want to build a relationship. And, here's something, and I can't stress this enough. It's important to be friendly. Really, it's important to be friendly. Some people come off arrogant and they come off as oppositional. In what that gives off a negative vibe. It's one thing to be principled. You can share your principles about your religion, about, what you think about politics. And, they say about politics and religion, it can be very, very dangerous in a conversation. So you certainly want to check where you're stepping. But it's okay to have your feelings about it. But it's another thing to be oppositional when somebody else gives input to a conversation to then walk in and shut them down. You see, that's oppositional, that's argumentative, and that's not the inclusive kind of thing. And if you come off that way, then it shuts people off. It turns people off to you. And you might have a lot of very interesting and important things to say, but it's important that when you're having a conversation that you seem inclusive. And especially if this is the one-on-one thing. If you are in a group setting, it's important to learn how to share the conversation in that group setting. So if you're interested in somebody in particular in that group that you want to speak to at another time, it's great to, indicate to that person, directly that you would like to talk with them. But understand too that you want to give the impression that collectively you know how to be in a group setting, which is friendly and amicable, as well as being able to have a conversation one-on-one. See, that's attractive because we tend to notice people in group settings and how they behave, and that gives us an indicator as some of their, personality traits. Personality traits being, are they inclusive, or are they friendly, or are they the kind of person that likes to dominate the conversation and doesn't want to give anyone else an opportunity to speak? Because that sort of person is selfish. At least that's the way it appears. Now, sometimes this could be somebody's nerves just going haywire and they don't take the time to recognize that there's other people, or they don't share the conversation. But that's a bad trait, you see. So if you're a person that seems like you're that type, then understand the image that you're putting out there. So you want to check yourself. You want to be able to self-correct, because that's a grown-up thing to do, is to catch yourself. And here's another thing, and I think this is very, very important, and especially in conversations. When you misspeak, meaning you say something that's inaccurate, incorrect, or wrong, acknowledge that. Say, you know what? I made a mistake. Let me correct myself. Or thank you for catching me on that. You see, those are the kinds of ways in which when you're in a conversation and you share that, it really gives the impression that you are open, you are listening to other people and their feelings and their opinions, and that you appreciate their input, and and thank them for the correction. It's a very gracious thing to be able to do, and a very mature thing to be able to do. So learn that in conversations, that being able to take the correction, or if you misspeak, that you accept that graciously and be willing to move on. You don't have to dwell on it, because there's no need to dwell on something, but it is, and don't counterattack. Don't make it a point that now if somebody corrects you that you're going to go after them, because that's one of those adversarial things that immature people seem to do. So remember to be friendly, not oppositional. Be available, so that when you're having a conversation, it makes it seem like you really want to be in that conversation, and they can follow up with, say, the possibility of meeting at another time. You see, that's the availability. You want to know yourself so that you can be in conversation with someone and have really sincere answers, and it gives the opportunity to do follow-up conversations. And above all, have some confidence in yourself. Remember, you're out there wanting to make a connection because you're worth it. You are worth having a relationship with somebody who cares about you, who wants to be interesting and interested in you. So facilitate that. I'm going to come back with a few other things after this message. Stay tuned.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. And this particular episode is Don't Be Shy. The first segment, I was talking about some things in terms of being able to get yourself out there and having the confidence and how to be in conversation, how to be available. Now, I touched on a few of the don'ts, just kind of a smattering of a few things, but I want to put it in a little bit more this way. It's important conversationally if you're awkward at having conversation, let's say you've had trouble with this, or you just can't seem to figure out why when you have conversations with people, things just don't seem to move along. Well, try some of these things and see if they fit. And if they do, then stop doing them, because I'm going to give you some of the don'ts. I gave you some of the do's, some of the yeses in the first part about having confidence, knowing yourself, being available, being friendly, and not being oppositional. And now I'm going to talk about some of the don'ts. And one of the things that is real important, don't be a know-it-all. Know-it-alls are not interesting people, because if you know it all, what's there for somebody else to contribute? Because conversations, and just by their nature, they're for people to be able to speak more than just the one person, especially if it's a group setting. I mean, if you're being paid to make a speech, okay, that's your job. But when you're with other people, they want to contribute also. That's the social nature of things. And if you find yourself in situations where you're not included in stuff, you might have to do that self-check. You might have to look in the mirror and say, okay, how are you when you are with groups of people? Do you dominate the conversation? Now, you may be the intellectual giant in the room. That's great, but you have to have the wherewithal to allow other people to contribute and to be in the conversation and to be in your space, and also not to have to feel like they're going to be dominated by you, because conversations are fun when people are having a good time. So remember that. Just because you're an intellectual giant doesn't mean that we want to just listen to your voice. And, and here's just sort of a side note, and this is kind of more of the situation when you get one-on-one with somebody, but don't spend so much time talking about your ex relationship. They're an ex relationship for a reason. And there are times and there are places to talk about some of those things when, let's say, you're finally connecting with a person and you're sharing. And this happens a little bit. Most of us do when we're meeting someone and we're talking about, why we're single. Okay. And you're talking about some of the circumstances and situations that happened to you in the old relationship and why it ended. So yeah, things like that, it's going to come up in those kinds of circumstances. But it's about having the conversation and moving through it, not dwelling on it. Because here's the thing. If you dwell on that kind of stuff too long, it's going to give the appearance that you haven't gotten over it. So I'm telling you, if you're a person who's in conversation with somebody who's behaving that way, I don't care how good they look or how rich they are, go the other way. Because that's not necessarily a person who's going to be available for you, because they still have baggage and that is going to follow them. They need to process that stuff and move through it. Sometimes it's difficult, and it could be that they've had several situations like this, and you just may be the next person that they happen to trap and are having a conversation with, and you just have to find your way to exit that so that you're not stuck having to listen to them drone on about all the bad experiences they've had. Because you are going to get put in the position of having to be the fixer, meaning you're going to have to find the reason to give them to to want to be in a relationship with you so that you are not like their ex. Now, if you're what I call like a white knight, meaning you rush in and want to save the day, then that's your project. That's your fixer-upper. But you don't necessarily want to be in that situation because that is not healthy. It's not healthy for you. It's not healthy for them. And you don't want to give them an excuse to be stuck in their life, not moving forward. Because a relationship is about building a partnership, it's about building a connection so that when you both invest in it, you both can get something out of it. You can lean on them, they can lean on you, whether it's romantic or friendship, either way. But don't spend an incredible amount of time talking about the exes and all the bad stuff they did. Because really, what's the point? It just takes the conversation a direction where it doesn't have to be. And that's in your past. Be grateful that you're out of that situation and you're not still living it. Now, here's an important one. Don't drink too much. Here's the problem. When you start drinking too much, then you become some of those other things I just talked about. You talk too much, you talk about your ex, or some of your bad stuff starts to come out. Sometimes you might be talking about things that you don't even need to bring up anymore. Some people wonder how much of their past should they bring up? And, that really is an interesting question because sometimes we have things in our past that can be pretty embarrassing and just you don't want to necessarily have to relive. And I think it's fortunate that you can make the call here. If it's not going to have any impact on the person that you're with, the new person that you're in a relationship with, you don't need to bring it up. It's not necessary. Because there are things in our past that we just don't need to talk. We don't need to talk about all the parking tickets we had or the speeding tickets or something like that. What those things are supposed to show you, and probably more the speeding ticket, because that's more of a behavior kind of thing. Like if you drive too fast, slow down so that you don't get speeding tickets. And you don't need to make a big deal about that. But if you're a reckless driver and you're bragging about all the tickets that you got, you know what? That to me is a red flag. I'm not getting in a car with you. You're supposed to learn from your mistakes. And learn from it and move on. That way it's not something that's hanging over your own head because you can mess up your situation doing stuff like that. So that's just an illustration of how you leave things in the past and they don't be dragging. Again, that's baggage. Mature, grow up, move on. So don't drink too much because, like I said, it's an indicator when you have those kinds of excesses that you're out of control. You're not a safe person. You're not being very responsible and you're supposed to behave like an adult. Okay. And the other thing, don't talk about your aches and pains because again, that falls in line with all of the baggage things that you talk about and that you can't get over. Look, if you have aches and pains, look, we all do at some point in time or another, but it's about what do you do about it? Do you solve the problem or do you just complain about it? Because if you're a whiner or a complainer, you're not going to be interesting. You're going to probably take over the conversation with all your aches and pains, and that's a downer. That is difficult in conversations, either whether it's group or one-on-one. We don't need to be a part of that. So learn to solve problems. And you know what? Now, this is interesting, and you can just briefly touch on this. Hey, if you're a problem solver, that's an interesting person to be with. You can talk about that. I had this situation, I had to solve the problem and make it something that's practical. Make it something that you can be in a conversation with and you don't have to dwell on it because now you're talking about a doer, not somebody that just lays around and just waits for the world to come take care of you because that emotionally is expensive. And, I wouldn't want to be around something like that. So to make it clear, don't be a know-it-all. Don't spend too much time talking about your ex. Don't drink. Don't be under the impact of all your medications because, again, that could show a lack of control. Don't talk about all your aches and pains because that's just something that, again, gives a negative. Remember those first impressions. So, be somebody who's interesting, somebody that you would want to be around, somebody that's attractive. That is a place to start with this. I'm going to take a break and I'll be right back. You're listening to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and I'm talking about don't be shy. So we're getting you out there so that you can have a relationship, a conversation with people, and being yourself, whatever kind of relationship you want. You want the romance, you want the friendship, just getting out there. So if you're just kind of stuck in your own place and you're wondering, how do I do this? Or maybe you've tried doing things and it's just not working for you. Take some of these tips with you and you will be able to connect with someone. Now, I'm going to wrap up the podcast by talking about this part of, so I've given you some do's and don'ts, but here's something to kind of give you a personal tune-up. You have to get it into your mind. It's going to take a little bit of work here because you have to know what you want and you have to get through some of these things by giving yourself some mental training. You're going to have to visualize, and this is a great technique. It works in a lot of ways. So visualization is just simply that. See in your mind's eye, you being in conversation with someone and it having a positive outcome. That's what you want. You want to have that vision. You want to have that for yourself. See yourself, not just somebody else. See yourself. Make it you. You have that positive image of yourself having a conversation with someone. Because when you're shy, you probably see yourself as hiding in the corner and cringing and running. No, we don't want that for you. We got to get past that. Put that image out of your mind of running and have the image of you being in conversation with someone. Because with that, imagine that people want to talk to you because you are interesting. And you're going to be interesting because you're going to do the homework. You're going to think about the things that I've talked about earlier in this podcast about what you want, about some interesting things about you so you can be in conversation and then have in your mind what that conversation is going to be like. Almost as if it's a script. Don't make it seem like it's a script when you're having a conversation, but in the idea that you have these things down, write them down for yourself. You need to write down your positive traits. And if you can't think of what they are, have a good friend write them down. But have those in mind because it helps you see your value. And when you can see your value, then you feel better about yourself. We have in our minds, there's a lot of negative self-talk that goes on. It's subconscious. It stops us. It makes us afraid. We don't take risks. We see ourselves as failures. Because we are bombarded by these things. And these things happen and they talk to us in our dreams if you pay attention. Now, some people have great dreams where they see themselves accomplishing things. That's great. There are a lot of people that don't have that. And in your subconscious mind, these things play out. So when you're dreaming, your fears, all of that conversation starts to come alive. And maybe you remember your dreams. If you do, great. And if you have trouble remembering, when you wake up, have a notepad next to your bed so you can write some of these things down. And you can see what's happening in your sleep. That way, you can start to work on some positive reinforcement, some positive self-images, so that when it comes to the part about dealing with the shyness, then you can see that you have things that are valuable. And if you've never been told that, well, it's probably time that you recognize it for yourself, because this is going to be part of your self-esteem. This is part of your homework. So I want you to get some mental toughness, and I want you to figure out these things about yourself. And when you carry this with you, this is sort of your suit of armor, so to speak. I mean, yeah, I talked about vulnerability, but I'm also talking about having the self-confidence so that you can remember it takes confidence to be vulnerable. Get that? Yes, you have to be confident in yourself in order to show some vulnerability so that you want to be open to receiving what other people have, that you want to share conversations, you want to be in relationships. See, that takes vulnerability. It's not about toughness. Look at all the tough guys in the world. You know, think of all the movies that we've seen. We see all the tough guys. You know, the ones who are the most interesting is the ones who are vulnerable. I mean, they have that toughness, but they have that vulnerability. Those are the ones that are interesting. Think about it, man or woman. So we want to make you in that image, and having your strengths, having your vulnerability, because that's attractive. You see, that's what attracts people, and people can see that it's genuine. And when you exude that authenticity, that genuineness, people stick around, because that is sexy. That's what people like. If that's what you needed to hear, it's sexy. That's what people like. It's authentic. And we all have our own little bullcrap meter that says when somebody is just spouting out stuff. Okay. We all have that. And when it's not attractive, we may even just sort of, okay, listen, and then, okay, I'm going, I'm leaving. We all have that inside. Sometimes people aren't just going to call you out on it because people are polite. Some people are too good natured to want to care about calling you out on your stuff. They just let you stew in your own juices, so to speak. But we all have an ability to see when somebody's just gassing you. Okay. So don't be one of those kinds of individuals. Be authentic, be real. And being yourself, remember, we're creating a new you here. Being yourself, that's going to want to make people come and be in your space and want to share time with you. So give yourself the gift of the self-confidence. And you know what? Here's something, and this is just real practical information. Everybody isn't going to be a good fit. So in the interest of doing all of the homework, all the things that we've talked about or that I've shared with you in this podcast, it won't necessarily work for every situation, for every person you meet. Some people have their own ideas, their own agendas. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. It just means maybe that person had a different idea of what they wanted. And they may have listened to this podcast and found something else for them. So it's hit or miss. But that's just the nature of human beings in general, because there are lots of people out there, and finding the right person who connects with you, it takes work. You're going to have to put yourself out there. There's many instances in which people have spent lots of time looking for the quote unquote right one for them. Some people luck up and they find them right away. Well, that doesn't happen all the time. That's the rare occasion. It takes some work, it takes some thought, and it takes the trial and error part of this, because you may do all of the things right and somebody doesn't necessarily share that same sort of interest. And it could be vice versa. Somebody else could be trying to be attractive to you and it just doesn't work. So you see, that part of it you have no control over. And you have to understand that you don't have control over a lot of things. The only thing you have control over is yourself. So you be responsible to that part. You address those things and let the rest happen naturally. And I think that is a much healthier way of looking at the situation. And you're not a victim. I don't ever want you to see yourself as a victim. See, in these circumstances, you make choices, you make positive choices, and you're likely to have great results. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.